How would you treat an emotional wound? I would say you would treat an emotional wound like a physical wound. We're going to get into this in this episode, beloveds, and I hope that this can give you some clarity as to why it is so important to nurture, to process, to take care your emotional wounds the same way you take care of your physical wounds. Now, let's start off with physical wounds. What happens when you accidentally cut yourself or get hurt? You have a contusion or a bruise because you hit something. What happens immediately? Your brain gets all of these signals to tell you, the body, uh-oh, something's going on. We've hurt ourselves. Now it's time to bleed, or now it's time to create inflammation or make you feel the physical pain so that it triggers you to understand, hey, there's something happening in this situation and you better take care of it, right? The pain is almost instant. It doesn't become instant if you're kind of unaware or your focus is on something else. I've had that happen to me so many times where I'll get hurt or I'll start bleeding somewhere. And because I'm so focused on something else, my wife would come up to me and say, "Did you know you were bleeding? Like, when'd you get cut?" And then when I have my attention to that cut, then the pain would rush in. And then I would feel it at that moment. So those are the rare instances that you might not feel the pain right away. And that just goes to show you how powerful your attention and mind really is. But most people, when they get hurt, when they hit something, you feel it right away. We begin to go into immediate shock depending on how severe the trauma or the injury is. And then we start to see things, right? We'll start to see blood coming out. We'll see the gash. We'll see the purple bruise on our legs. And it'll start to hurt. And then immediately, we will start to tend to that injury, or someone else would notice and come tend to you. Like every time my children get hurt, they would cry because it hurts. Their body is in pain. The affected area is causing these triggers and sending messages to their brain like, oh my gosh, there's something going on. Help, 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 help. And then as parents, we would go and help our children. We would go and clean up the injury, put antibiotics or put medicine, and then put a Band-Aid on it. Hug and nurture our children so that they would feel safe and understand that everything is okay. And as adults, we do the same thing, but we don't have to feel safe. There's no one there to make us feel safe, because normally when minor injuries like that happen, we just tend to it, put a Band-Aid over it, as long as nothing's broken or if we're still conscious and it's not profusely bleeding, then we're good to go, right? Even if we have a bruise, we'll put some ice on it for a couple minutes or a heat press, relax for a little bit, and then off we go. As adults, we've been conditioned to handle the pain. I don't know about you, but I couldn't show any pain if I was hurt when I was a child. I would get reprimanded even. I was made to feel shame and guilt because everything was my fault. Even if I got hurt accidentally, it would still be my fault and I would feel terrible as a child. But my parents didn't know how to nurture me in those instances. So I've learned how to cope with physical pain as you got to suck it up. You have to take care of it. As long as you're not dying, then you'll be all right. Put some medicine on it and just relax for like 5 minutes and you'll be fine. That's the severity of the conditioning that I had, which made me grow up to manage physical pain like that. But that's physical pain. At least I tended to it. At least I gave it time and consideration, even though it came with a lot of guilt and shame. Does that make sense? But in the moment, I had to tend to it because I can physically see that I was hurt. I can physically see that I was bleeding out. I could physically see that something was going on and I needed to take care of it. And that's something that even the people around you, if you were injured, they can also see and observe that something happened to you. Those are the most distinctive things about physical wounds and emotional wounds. Emotional wounds are very insidious. They're very psychological. They're invisible. You can't see it. You can't see like a wound going into your heart or your spirit. Words don't have little conjurings of smoke that you can see if you say something from your mouth that enters the person's body, right? We don't see any of that. It's all invisible. So emotional wounds can be very detrimental. Does it hurt? Oh, hell yes. Does it hurt as much as a physical wound? Oh, hell yes. And it could even hurt more than a physical wound. At least a physical wound, you can see it heal. You know how long it's going to take. If you have a cut, right? You put some medicine on it, you put a band-aid on it, next week, gone. It'll just leave a small scar, if that, depending on how severe the injury is. Emotional wounds, on the other hand, whoo, yeah, that can take decades. That can inflict emotional distress, psychological distress. And that pain can last decades. It can even be transferred down generations. It could even be passed on through epigenetics throughout your lineage. Secrets that are being held with families, unprocessed emotions, unprocessed trauma can also be passed down by generations. And you can see it if you've dealt with that trauma in your life. I can personally say that I had a lot of inherited trauma from my father, from my mother, and the behavior and the conditioning that I had from said trauma, I was also projecting and passing it down to my children. If I did not decide to heal, I would have been repeating the cycle. And that, beloved, is very dangerous. And that is why I am such a proponent of healing, of self-development, of awareness, to understand what each of us have been going through throughout our childhood, throughout our lives, the behaviors that we display in front of people, in front of our spouses and our partners, in front of our children. Some of that is very unconscious because we've been conditioned by these emotional wounds that we've identified with it, and we take it for who we are, when in actuality, you are not like that. In actuality, you are someone different who probably doesn't want to act that way, who probably doesn't want to believe those things that are very harmful for your self-confidence, your self-worth, your self-love. So when you experience an emotional wound, you should tend to it, just like how you tend to a physical wound. You should take the time to process through that experience. It's going to come with a lot of negative emotions. It's going to come with a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of narratives and beliefs that you've experienced from before. And that's going to further damage you if you don't take the time to recognize and be aware of these wounds and then process through them. Now, what do I mean by process through these emotional wounds? You have to feel to heal. You have to recognize the thoughts that are going through your mind when you are experiencing these emotional wounds. If someone is saying something to you and those words hurt you, you are experiencing an emotional wound. If you break up with someone that you loved, if you get betrayed, if someone is dishonest with you, those negative emotions are causing these emotional wounds within your body. Your body will react no matter what, whether physical or emotional wound. The way it reacts is totally different. Physical wounds are very external. You can see the things happening. Even if it's an internal wound, you can see the inflammation, you can see the bruise, you can see things swell up in your body. Emotional wounds are different. You feel these sensations and they make you feel uncomfortable. Your breath starts to become shallow. You start to clench your fist because you're angry. You start to cry because you're hurt. You feel this grief, you feel this sadness. You have heart palpitations if you feel betrayed. You get knots in your stomach when you feel anxious or scared. These are still reactions from a wound, but this wound is an emotional wound. So how do you work through that? How do you process that? You have to allow them. It's going to feel shitty. It's going to feel horrible. But you have to stand your ground and allow yourself to feel. Most of us have developed coping mechanisms to not feel, to suppress and repress those emotions. You have to learn how to allow. Just like when you watch and observe children, when they feel any type of discomfort, emotionally, physically, the first thing they do is they allow themselves to feel. They will cry, they will tantrum, they will express themselves fully. And then once they're done, they go back to being normal. They go back to having fun. Their normal state of being is trying to experience joy in the moment, which as adults we should be doing too. But because we have been in this survival mode and we've learned all these coping mechanisms to deal with said emotional wounds or emotional pain, we've learned how to suppress it. But we all know what that's going to do in the long run. One little thing can trigger you and then you just explode. And if you're watching this and you have that type of behavior, I would encourage you to take the steps to learn, identify these emotional wounds and how to process them. For me, it was all about learning how to feel. It was all about being able to articulate how I felt. It was also about learning how to be aware of how my body reacts to certain emotions after I was able to articulate. And then I had to learn how to regulate my body in the moment as I was feeling very uncomfortable, as I was feeling very awkward, because I was never able to do that growing up. You have to take these steps to have awareness and face these very uncomfortable emotions. And they will bring up some very uncomfortable memories. It will bring up some buried secrets. They will bring up some shameful, confronting moments in your life where you don't want to talk about them anymore. You don't want to relive those moments. But in actuality, you have to. You have to come to terms with it. You have to allow your body to process those emotions because you've never gotten the chance to do that at the time it happened. And your body remembers. Remember, the body keeps the score. So you have to allow yourself to work through that emotional wound. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some dedication. It's going to take consistency, which is why I'm telling you right now, beloved, healing is a long process. Healing is a consistent process. You have to choose to heal moment by moment, day by day. Because at any time, you can get triggered, you can be reminded, you can feel those negative emotions again. And if you revert back to your conditioned behavior to suppress or repress or just forget about it, then it's just going to compound. That energy, that emotion is just going to compound and grow in your body until one day you won't be able to handle it anymore. And unfortunately, the people around you will be the one who suffers because you're not going to be able to control it. So you have to take intentional steps to help you process through those wounds. You have to nurture yourself. You have to allow it to happen. You can reach out to someone, a mentor, a coach, join groups, talk to someone. And I understand it's going to come with a lot of shame. It's going to come with a lot of these negative emotions and memories that you'd rather forget. But you don't want to deal with that later on in life. You don't want your children to deal with that. You don't want your friends and your partners to deal with that. You have to do this for yourself, or else they will be the ones that will have to be your punching bag. And then that's going to cause you even more guilt. So you don't want to be in this cycle of projecting yourself with all this unprocessed negative emotions. You have to go back and mend and tend to those wounds. You can do it by talking about it. You can do it by sitting in silence, breathing, allowing your body to understand and feel the emotions it was supposed to feel back then. I don't know how many times where I've sat in meditation and I would intentionally think about a specific memory because it would just pop up, and I would allow myself to feel in that moment. And for some reason, I would just start crying, or for some reason, my heart rate would go up, my body would start to react because in total silence, I'm just reliving those memories. Did it suck? Oh, hell yes. But I had enough calmness, I had enough awareness to be in the moment and be present with that memory, be present with those emotions. And when I got done with that meditation, I felt 1,000 times better. Now, there are many ways to help you tend and mend to those emotional wounds. I would just encourage you to find different ways. Whatever way resonates with you, whatever way that you can implement that practice on a daily basis. It's good to find someone to keep you accountable. It's good to share those stories because it helps you with the healing process. But as long as you make it an intentional choice to want to do that, then those emotional wounds can feel better. You will have a scar because the memory will still be there, but the emotional charge and the energy behind it will be gone. Hopefully, you can get to a point where you can remember a specific memory that used to hurt, but now your perspective has changed about it, and there is no emotional attachment to it. For example, I used to feel really ashamed, frustrated, resentful every time I would talk about my father because of all the trauma that he made me go through. But now that I've done all this healing, that I've come to terms, that I've accepted, that I've practiced compassion around it, every time I talk about my father, I feel nothing but compassion and gratitude. And it took me a long time to get to this point. But nonetheless, I'm here. And I don't feel bad about it. I don't curse his name. I don't, think about all these bad things about him. I don't feel these sensations in my body when I speak his name or speak about him. And that's how you know that you've tended to these emotional wounds, because your body is not acting out with all of these negative sensations. My heart is not palpitating. I'm not clenching my fist. I'm talking about my father in a nice, calm manner. There's no negative thoughts running through my mind. This is when you start to understand that you are taking the steps to mend those emotional wounds. And hopefully you can liberate yourself from those negative emotions that are attached to these hurtful memories. But now you've liberated and transmuted those negative emotions into good emotions. You feel more content. You're more at peace about it. You're not attached to it. And then you can go on about living your life the way you want to. All right, beloved? I hope that this episode has given you some insight, some practical tips, and some clarity about the importance of emotional wounds and how you should tend to them. If you have any questions or need further clarification, don't forget to reach out via email or comment on the video. DM me on all my socials. I'd be happy to explain to you. But if you are intentionally doing the work and you are currently on your healing journey, this is what you have to do. And I believe in you. I know you can do it. I'm rooting for you, beloved. Healing is the hustle. I will see you on the next episode.